So thank you very much. I'm glad it's such a small and intimate audience. This is terrific. That means the discussion afterwards could be really productive. First thing I would like to do is to thank you for that introduction, by the way.
You're welcome.
Is to give away a couple of party favors to people that have been instrumental in a way, literally instrumental in a transition that I've experienced over the last really 5 years that I'm going to talk about today, from a hardcore bibliophile, card-carrying classicist to somebody who takes all of that knowledge, interest, aptitude, and has transposed it into environmental humanities and a concern for the things that concern us all, global climate change, how to live in this world responsibly, ecologically. That's what I'm going to talk about today. But first, the party favors. Late this morning, this is for my new chair, Beverly Wemple, in the Department of Geography. I moved to the Department of Geography after the university closed down my department of classics. A little bit of a sad story, but for me, it's a silver lining with that cloud. So I'm in a new department with terrific colleagues who appreciate the humanities, kind of the thing I do, but also have a lot to offer me in terms of science and social science expertise in demographics and geography, in particular. Now, I was hoping, but I don't see her out there, Sherry Morse would be here because she is the co-director of the environmental program, and I'm a member of that program as well. And that also kind of marks this transition from hardcore classicist to classicist with an environmental humanities bent. She's not here, so I'm going to give these.
I'll take them for her.
You will. So these eggs are for Sherry Morse.
She's got a positive COVID case at home, so isolating.
Geez.
Oh, bummer. Okay, okay, got it. This is being recorded. So what I'm going to talk about today is my latest book. I'm on research leave at the University, Aix-Marseille University in Marseille, France, at the Institute for Advanced Study there. It's a 10-month fellowship, and I've already finished 2 books I'll tell you a little bit about while there. And this book here is should be under contract this time next week with Princeton University Press. So let me begin by parsing the title, Following Nature's Lead. So in antiquity, all the schools of philosophy, Cynics, Platonists, Aristotelians, Stoics, even skeptics, operated on this principle. And I think it's an important ecological principle for us today when we think about ethics and how to live in the world responsibly, given the way the world works, the way the biosphere works. And that is, they believed one should live secundum naturam in Latin, according to nature, or following nature's lead. The word secundum, it's like a preposition, but it really comes from a verb sequor, which means to follow. That's where I get my main title. So the question that I'm interested in is, what does it mean to follow nature's lead or live secundum naturam, according to nature, in the modern world with a scientific understanding of nature? In other words, how can our scientific understanding of the world impact the ethical and then therefore policy choices that we make in how to live and how to be in the world, individually, but also collectively? So the second part, the subtitle, Ancient Ways of Living in a Dying World. So the publisher was initially a little bit skeptical about dying in the title, right? But this is important, all right? And it's true. We live in a finite world, a finite planet. The sun is going to snuff itself out like billions of stars before it. I don't know, this time next week? I don't think so, but it's going to. Our species is probably going to go extinct like so many species before in the eons that have preceded us. This is a reality we really need to face. And so another question that concerns me is save the planet, right? Save biodiversity, environmental justice. All these things are hugely important, but I always ask myself, for what? In other words, what are we really saving the planet for? So what is it going to look like afterwards? So things can just continue the same way that they've always been, so that we can, use resources, overuse resources in a different way than we're using them now? I don't think so. Nobody here would agree with that premise, but sometimes I wonder the for what question. So living in a dying world, that's a fact. And the ancients were all the ancient schools of philosophy understood this, that life is a rehearsal for death, your individual death, but also the ultimate fate, which is finite for human beings on this planet. That wasn't a downer, that was a prospect for living well while we have it. So what does it mean to live ecologically in a dying world? If it's a dying world, fact, what are reasons we can give for ecological living anyhow? Like what are the compelling arguments? So ancient ways, of course, is what I do. And ancient ways, oh, you know what? You loaded the PowerPoint and I added an additional slide, but I will skip that slide because it was so good too, but maybe I'll paraphrase it for you. So ancient ways, as a classicist, I work in the classical tradition. So the Western paradigm, right? Western, quote unquote, authors. Are there other ancient ways to live in this world ecologically? Yes, indigenous ways, Buddhist ways, Hindu ways, Islamic ways, secular ways. I'm not valorizing one over the other. I'm working from my area of expertise, but I will say that I'm a little bit, I'm grinding an axe just a little bit to a finer point, because in the discourse concerning ecology, ecological living, there tends to be a finger pointed to the Western paradigm as the source of the problem. Partially true, but the ancients that I study were pre-modern. They were pre-industrialized, they were pre-digital, they were pre-postmodern, they were pre-post-human. They lived with a sensitivity and a closeness to the exigencies of their environment that we don't live under today. We've been, our technology enhanced disconnectedness from nature makes our experience different, I think, from the ancients, at least as I read the ancients. So they have what Bruno Latour calls a sort of sensitivity, speaking in terms of like system science, to react to the conditions of their environment in a way that perhaps we've lost, or certainly, how about this, that we can recover from them. So I look to the ancients and I see solutions for our current world. And so that ancient ways. The slide that I don't have, that I wish I had, that I could read to you or you could see, is a quotation from G.K. Chesterton. And he says this, that about tradition, right? Because really what I study in classics is tradition. He says, tradition is the democracy of the dead. It is giving a vote to our ancestors who just happened to be dead by an accident of death, right? Whereas, you know, we would never think that we would just give the vote to certain people, by like noble people or rich people, just by an accident of their birth. We believe that democracy is for all. So that notion of, you know, tradition, studying the past as letting the ancestors speak is meaningful to me, and it inspires me to do what I do. So and finally, I call this an origin story, because I'm going to explain to you how I got to where I am now from where I was maybe 5-6 years ago. And in classics, we deal with what are called etiologies, or especially if we study myth, for instance, etiological myths. If you're a scientist, you know what an etiology is. It's an explanation of a cause. What causes something else to happen? We do this in classics too, remarkably, and so I'm gonna kind of tell you how I got to be where I am, and it's not from book learning. It's from the farm that you mentioned that we run in Shoreham. So my wife and I run this farm, 125 acres. We have sheep, we have Scottish Highland cattle, we have chickens. You know, is it a hobby farm? I don't know. It seems like a lot more than a hobby to me. Is it a gentleman's farm? I don't think so, because I'm not much of a gentleman. And I spent like 3 hours before driving up here doing work outside, and my hands are finally starting to get crusty and you know, disheveled again. They were all lily white and soft while I was in Marseille not working. Working this farm and living close to the land and having to make decisions and react to our environment and the challenges that it poses is kind of what got me interested in two things: sustainability as a large concept, and also system science. So complex systems, how things are related to one another, holistic living. So these are the two people that purport to run the farm, but really the animals in the farm run them. This is the farmer and her husband on the right, and this is our house, just a snapshot of house in one of the barns. We built that all ourselves, and so it was a pay-as-you-go, learn-as-you-go sort of operation. So a lot of problem solving and dealing with things on the ground in a tangible, practical way. You know, I'm a classicist. I read Homer, all these, you know, dead white guys, but this experiential, literally experiential learning is kind of what brought me to an interest in environmental humanities. This culminated in this book from 2020. I know at least one person in the audience has read some of it, bless him. And Plato's Pigs and Other Ruminations, where I talk about the backstory of sustainability and system science in classical antiquity. So some of the topics I talk about today are related to that book, but also forward-looking to the book I just described to you, Following Nature's Lead. That led to this book, which appeared just this fall, How to Be a Farmer, An Ancient Guide to Life on the Land, published by Princeton. It's an anthology of extracts about farming, not just farming, living close to the land, and quite a variety of different kind of experts. And not so much like how to, like not how to, you know, hoe your beans or what grapes to plant in your vineyard, but more of farming as a state of mind, or what it means to live in a landscape and think in a landscape. That's something that, you know, as a new member of the Department of Geography, I'm very excited about pursuing in other projects as well, the influence of landscape on sort of social symbolic systems that human beings live according to. That led to this book, How to Say No. This is about the cynics. The cynics were, they weren't really philosophers. I'm not sure what they were. They were kind of performance artists in antiquity. They were street people. They were what were they? They were more than normal people who lived without. Their goal was to live with as little as possible and to live that way as publicly as possible, as a protest against social convention. And essentially, they said no to social conventions and culture, and were adamant about how we can live much more closely to nature than we think we can. So this idea of living close to nature, the cynics were probably the card-carrying exemplars of that from antiquity. So How to Say No, Diogenes and the Cynics. I just finished this, and it's in press right now, and it should be coming out this fall in the same series by Princeton as before. This is the cover that I wanted to put on this book. So what you saw on the previous cover was Diogenes holding his lantern, looking for a good man in the middle of the broad daylight, because they're so hard to find. Good people are so hard to find. You need a lantern, even in broad daylight, to find them. And he had his little dog next to him. I don't know if you noticed a little Toto. The word cynic means dog or dog-like in Greek. And it was a term of cast as an aspersion against cynics because their behavior was so inhuman, and you know, they did all their business out in the open, you know, fornicating, defecating, you name it, they did it. Again, as this obvious protest against social convention. They also were very fond, or at least Diogenes was very fond of this gesture, which I think is the ultimate no. It's no with no questions asked, no explanation given. It's just no, right? So, and actually there is an anecdote, two or three anecdotes about Diogenes doing this in antiquity. I won't belabor the point, but I just thought they wouldn't let me have that on the cover. So this, I just put this in here because it's a little dog that is a little dingbat that graces the pages of the book. But again, if you know anything about like Pompeii, a lot of people who aren't even into classics know about Pompeii, you'll recognize that as a drawing from a colleague of mine I've collaborated with in the past with with other projects that he's illustrated for me of this mosaic from Pompeii, Kawe Kanem, beware the dog, right there. All right, two maps I want to show you quickly because I'm now almost a certified geographer. This one is the Roman Empire at its greatest extent in 117 AD under the Emperor Trajan. So when the Pax Romana had reached its full extent and all was well with the world and happy. Not true, but even so, territorially, this was the greatest extent. And I just show it here because look how much area the study of classics encompasses, even more than this. But this is the ancient Mediterranean basin, but it pushes into the Near East, pushes up into Dacia and Bulgaria. Ukraine is just right up there, all the way to Spain, North Africa. So you have this congeries of cultures and languages and traditions that are all interacting when you study classics in the ancient Mediterranean world, and they percolate, they surface in what you study. So we're really talking about sort of an area and international studies discipline when you talk about studying the classics, but just in the past. So again, the democracy of the dead, you've got a lot more than just like dead white guys talking when you study the classics. You're talking about this geography even, this little the Mediterranean is sort of like a microclimate. And if you look at the extent of the Roman Empire, it's interesting that it's almost coterminous with where olives will grow, almost. Take Britain out, maybe take far out there. But the footprint of where the olive will grow and the climate that supports it is almost like the Roman Empire, which is very interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Another slide that is meaningful to me, another picture, another map, is this one. And this is representing time, geological and biological time. This idea of I study an area of the world in the past, but I'm also very concerned, and we should all be very concerned about where we come from and where we're going. And I think it gives us perspective to understand this time dimension. We're here writing, like we're just this little tiny sliver in geologic time that is almost insignificant, but yet we think we're so important, and yet we have this incredible technological power to destroy the world if we keep going on the way we are. So we need to have this perspective too, and even I do as when I study the past. And so I'm kind of marrying those two maps, space-time. I'm dealing with space-time in what I study as a classicist. So I want to give you something a little more tangible to take away. I'm going to give you three examples. I might not get to the last one, which is okay. I'll try to do these two here. So this idea of sustainability, right, of interest to me, of interest to us all. The word was coined in the 1970s, as a word. Now it's used, overused to the point where what does it mean? You talk about the war being sustainable. That war is not sustainable. Like, okay, well, there's a contradiction in terms. War, of course, it's not sustainable. You can't sustain a war. So it's used now for greenwashing. It's used everywhere. It's almost become a vapid term. So in antiquity, they had this idea of what was durable, what would last, what was undergirded to a point where it would subsist over time. An entity, or whether it be a society or an individual or any sort of structure. So I quote Shakespeare there, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So in antiquity, we're not going to find the word sustainability, but we will find the concept. But what words did they use to describe it? I'll just give you, I think I'm only going to have time to do the first two, so I'm going to actually call that right now. Plato, for example, he wrote the Republic. I argue in that book, Plato's Pigs, that his idea of sustainability is captured in his notion of justice. So we think of justice today as righting a wrong. If you're wronged, you have recourse to get justice, or it's correcting or some sort of rehabilitating a wrong. That's not what Plato meant when he talked about justice in the Republic. Justice in the Republic is everything in its right place, everyone doing his or her proper thing, activity in society to form a harmonious whole. And not only individuals interacting with society, but parts of the human soul, the mental function, the spirited function, the appetitive function, what makes us human, our psychology, literally, we called it the psyche, the soul, also has to, everything doing its part correctly, not exceeding its bounds. So you don't think with your groin, right? And vice versa. You're an integrated person who does, who lets the proper aspect of your psychology perform the activities you must perform. That's down and dirty. So Plato talks about justice in this way. And in the Republic, it's interesting. People, read the Republic today and they get scared and they see, totalitarianism. They see the philosopher king. They see no individual freedom. They see a lot of things that, could be taken in that direction from Plato. But my reading of Plato, I don't think that they're there at the heart and core of what Plato is all about. What people don't know about the Republic is that all those prescriptions about how to solve the problems of society do not represent Plato's, in my view, ideal society. So before Plato even embarks on this whole idea of the education of the guardians, you may not be familiar with this, but just, and the philosopher king and all of these prescriptive moves, right, to organize society. Before that, he says, this is early in book 2, so it's at the very beginning of the Republic. How do societies organize themselves and why? He says, well, societies come to be because no one is self-sufficient. No one can provide everything that other people need, right? People are not self-sufficient. So I have need of you, you have need of me, and we bring our contributions to form this whole that works in harmony. And as Plato describes it, and it's with a little bit of faux naivete, and he's sort of playing, I don't know if you're familiar with that game, SimCity. It's kind of like, he says, if I could play this, if I could set up an ideal society, here's how I might do it, and here's how it might work. His ideal society is a vegetarian, rustic society, people living very close to the land. Importantly, people not interested in land that's not theirs, that live within their means, right? This idea of living within the limits. And so because they live within their limits, they don't have to attack other cities, other towns to get what they don't have because they've already decided what they're to live within their means. And so there's no slavery in this society, because that was the source of slavery in antiquity. It was like a residual of war. It wasn't chattel slavery so much. It was like you lost in war, all your men and women become enslaved and work for the victors. So it's sort of a peaceable kingdom in which rustic, simple living peasants are living within their means, in harmony with one another, each bringing to the table what they can bring. And Socrates says that's the healthy society. That's the healthy one. And then one interlocutor in the Republic objects to this. He says, especially about the vegetarian diet, which is pretty interesting. He says, what do you mean? There's no cuisine in this culture? You're just going to eat like cabbages and beetroot and lettuce? And Socrates and he says, this interlocutor's name is Glaucon, says, what you're describing, Socrates, is a city for pigs. There's no culture there. There's especially no cuisine. Socrates retorts and says, you're not interested in a healthy city. You're interested in the feverish city, the one sick and in need of remediation. And the rest of the Republic, and we're talking book 2, and then there's 10 books in it. The rest of the Republic is about the remediation of a city that is defective. And how to fix it. But for Plato, through Socrates, he has this idea as the model. Okay, good time, about 5 minutes. So justice, the other concept, and this comes from the Roman world that I see as a prelude, a precursor to sustainability, is the word frugalitas in Latin. Our word frugality comes from it. And it means many of the same things. It meant many of the same things then as it does now, but it's interesting that this word comes from the word fruit, fructus, right? fruga. And so the idea, and it's also related to the Latin word for profit. And the Romans were such an agrarian society, right? Maybe a little bit like the one Plato imagines, or at least they idealized an agrarian society where produce was the result of, was fruit that grew in your garden or on your farm. And it's also the word for profit. In other words, profit is productive, and it's basically an agricultural notion. This is a value that the Romans really called themselves back to time and time again, even at the high empire when you have emperors and decadence and people living in luxury. They were adamant that a stable society is one that is rooted in the land, where the good citizen is a good farmer, and that these farms that would sustain society are not large factory farms that later grew up in the Roman period. They're called latifundia, but rather small farms worked by citizens themselves. So this notion of Roman frugality and small farming, this preference for small farming, and we can talk in the discussion about that some more, drew me to Roman agriculture and modern Roman agriculture. So these are trees from an agriturismo in Italy, where I've established a archaeological dig, not an archaeologist, but I'm kind of like the matchmaker and organizer of this project, where a friend of mine has discovered a Roman villa in an olive grove, where the Roman villa is ancient, 2nd century BCE, so really old, with substantial remains in an olive grove that is equally ancient. And in this olive grove, there are olives growing that are unknown to the modern genome. They're pre-modern. They're varieties that we don't know yet. So the prospects of propagating those ancient varieties is part of what this project is about. So we have an archaeological dig where we're finding the realia of what an ancient Roman villa looked like, but it's located in situ, literally in the olive grove, cheek by jowl, where the crop was produced. And those are equally ancient varieties. So we're doing a lot of things here. This is where it's located. It's about an hour and a half outside of Rome, in the Sabine Hills, which was proverbial frugal territory for the Romans. This is a mosaic that when I first visited, this was exposed, popping up through the grass. You can see it. This is before it's been preserved. It was just there. This is remains of an ancient water cistern. This is part of an underground barn that is called the cryptoporticus that we are excavating. This is what it looks like. It's extensive. It's not small. And in there, you find things like this. This is an olive oil separating vat. Unique because it's a 3-bay one. Those are technicalities you don't have to concern yourself with, but it is unique. And it is ancient because the pipe that connects the 3 bays, and it works by displacement, so that when you get down to this last bay, it's just oil with no water in it. That pipe is made out of lead and not iron, so it's definitely Roman. And we bring interns. If you're an undergraduate here and interested in this, next summer we'll start bringing interns again post-COVID, and they have the joy of discovery, where they find things like this in the ground, a little Neptune Triton there. But we also find stuff like this, and this is an ancient olive pit that literally I just plucked out of the ground the day I took this picture. There it was. Oh, look at that. Broke it open, and that's that. And why this is interesting is because the ancient pits that we're finding in the ground have a signature on them, the pits, because it's like a handprint or a fingerprint. Each olive variety has its unique signature with the cracks and the crevices in the pit. So you can take the ancient pit you find in the ground, compare it to the modern tree still growing in his olive grove that are 2,000 years old, these trees, some of them, and you can identify, you can make the match to see which one, where they go. So this, we can create a taxonomy of the trees that are in this grove based on the archaeological paleobotanical finds that we are unearthing from the site. And the goal of this, I'm very close to being done. The goal of this, and I'm not going to talk about monks. You can thank me for that. The goal of this is to propagate the unknown varieties. Why? Because if they've been resilient for this last 2,000 plus years, the chances are promising that they could be resilient and productive going into the future with issues of climate change and also fungal infection that are affecting olive trees everywhere, especially with the monoculture of the olive that is really taking over, for instance, like Spain. So there's promise here for, propagation that could produce varieties that will serve us well in the future. And never mind that, there's more propagation. There's also the prospects of tasting a little bit of ancient Rome. And I tell you, their olive oil, right? They produce olive oil. Their olive oil is definitely different. It's greener, it's more acidic, it's tartar. The stuff that we get, you buy in Costco, even this, the fine extra virgin olive oil you get in the States here is very just bland in comparison to this. This is probably what olive oil is supposed to taste like. Anyway, so there we go. And I'll stop there.